You've just
Shall we let
squeezed
Nick-
in an anecdote about you
I
running
know.
15Ks there. Talking of which, I think that should take us on to Nick,
Yeah, I think so.
who ran about
Nick,
15 metres before developing a cramp on Saturday.
Can I just say something, Nick? Like, for the
God,
listeners
here we
and
go.
followers of
You
this
knew
show,
this was coming.
mate, we've been hearing you moaning about your dodgy hamstring for the last
know.
2 months, and then shock horror, it was a
Did you not- did
problem
you not
when
know I
you
was
put on
doing
a
this?
Mascot. No, I didn't. I had no idea. Why? In fact, why have you not mentioned it on the show? And we're going to be talking about the England team, bowled out 4 times in 4 ODIs. Is that cause for concern? Losing a series against India. And we're going to be talking about the shifting tectonic plates of cricket with the FTP being leaked to the press. South Africa pulling out of an ODI series in Australia. The CSA selling its T20 domestic rights to the IPL. India taking over the game. And plenty more. But I suppose we should start at the top. George Dobell, Nick Friend alongside me. Let's talk about the top line. And
The top line.
now I'm going to put it to you that actually the top line is going to be something that's going to take place over the next week, possibly. The new chair of the ECB. And it comes at a time, in the last 7 days, essentially, the day that we dropped the last show, that the ECB announced an extension to its contract with Sky Sports. So Sky Sports will be the sole provider of cricket in this country in terms of the home stuff for an additional 3 years. I think that takes it up to 2027, 28. Either way, well, let's look at it, because if I was to put it to you that it might be, well, we spoke quite a lot last week about the benefits possibly of splitting things up from a broadcast perspective. That obviously hasn't happened, but can you tell us a little bit more about the new deal with Sky Sports and how essentially it's going to be played out within the counties and the tie-up with the ECB?
I was very surprised it was announced, because there are some significant holes in that. And you would have thought that the new chair and chief exec might want to do things their own way. They might want to take a fresh look at things, and it strikes me as a bit of a fait accompli before they start, particularly as they could start within weeks. So that was strange. One of the things that jumped out at me is there's no distribution deal for the counties at present, while people seem to be presuming that there's a continuation of the agreement whereby the counties are paid £1.3 million each for agreeing not to be involved in the 100. That has not been agreed. It has not. There is no such deal going forward. And there might be the mother of all rows over that, because the ECB finances have something like a £50 million hole caused by inflation. And somewhere they're going to have to make £50 million worth of savings. Now, it might be that they pay players too much, and that seems to be a recurring conversation around recent days. But I suspect there will be an attempt to reduce the amount they're paying the counties for their decision or for their agreement not to be involved in the blast. But that will be in the 100. But that will be difficult because the counties own the media rights for their grounds. So actually, they have the ECB over a bit of a barrel there. Without any of those things being decided, I thought it was quite strange that the announcement was made. Does that make sense? And the other thing was, of course, a new team might come in and they might want to do things differently, and they might want to talk to different broadcasters. But it seems to me that a lot of people involved in the ECB and a lot of people involved in the broadcast company, Sky, have staked their reputations on the success of the 100, and they're desperately keen that their legacy will be vindicated, and that is why the deal has been extended at this stage. I think it's an extraordinary decision. It's another reason why I think the game needs a new body which provides oversight, and I think it needs government support to do that.
Why wasn't the BBC included in the press release? Have you got any idea about that? And are we any closer to knowing who the new chair of the ECB is going to be, or when we're going to find out?
We're down to the last three in the race for the chair. Those three are Richard Thompson, who's the current chair of Surrey and very much the choice of the counties. Martin Darlow, who is the interim chair and has been on the board for a while as a recreational cricket voice. And Alan Dickinson, who was a former treasurer of Surrey. I think the continuity candidate is seen as Darlow, and Thompson is the choice of the counties. You would think that the choice of the counties would be the choice, but there was a nominations committee which some would think has been stacked a little bit by the people in power, and for that reason I think Darlow might be favourite, but I don't know, it's probably too close to call. The counties don't want continuity. They really don't. They want to shake it up. And I don't think they'd be happy with Darlow. But Darlow's a former policeman. He's a good person, but he is the continuity candidate. And if he gets that job, I think Claire Connor, who's the interim chief executive, would probably remain in that role in a permanent position. If Richard Thompson gets it, then I would say Johnny Grave of Cricket West Indies is probably favourite for, but Richard Gould, once of Surrey and now of Bristol, would be in the mix as well, and that would be, then all bets are off about what happens next, because you've got the two most vocal critics of the 100 in positions of power at the ECB. Could happen.
Tom Bostock at Durham. He's a Tim Bostock at Durham as well, possibly. Now, to play devil's advocate, well, not even devil's advocate, but, so how long would their tenure last? Is it a 4-year deal, or is it just in perpetuity, basically? Is it until they want to walk away? How does it work?
They've tended to be time-framed, haven't they? And I can't remember what it is. Is it 4 years or 5 years? I think it is. They changed it for Colin Graves, didn't they? And I can't remember. Sorry, off the top of my head. But it will be something around 4 years.
It would appear from the outside looking in that, considering over Tom Harrison's tenure, and if we just take the last few years, because he was at the top for quite some time, the ECB have had to let 60 plus employees go. You could argue that because of COVID in part, but essentially they had to make 60 odd people redundant. I can't remember the game being split in the manner that it is from grassroots to the top. The players seem disenfranchised, certainly off the back of what Ben Stokes was saying in the last 24 hours. The supporters seem, or a lot of the county supporters seem disenfranchised, if the flags that I see at the county grounds are anything to go by. We've had, a £2.1 million bonus being shared out. We've seen the creation of the 100, which, whether you think it's the right thing or the wrong thing, has had to happen because of the mistakes within the ECB that has let the game drift to an extent that the watching population is, in terms of age, second only to golf. The game is behind a paywall. This has all happened in the last 15 years or so on the ECB's watch. So wouldn't it make sense from the outsider looking in that somebody with fresh eyes come in and actually be given the responsibility to do things slightly differently from the people who have been doing this job for the last 10 years or so? Or is that incredibly naive to think that would even be a thing?
It depends what you mean. I mean, Colin Graves was in many ways an outsider in lots of ways. I don't know that cricket needs more strong characters to come in and say, this is the way we're going to do things, follow me. I quite liked the fact that Ian Watmore came in and tried to do things in a more sort of grown-up, consensual way, but it didn't work. I'd have liked Ron Khalifa to take over the chair role too, and he would have done it similarly, but again, it didn't really work. Democracy is messy. It's not absolutely perfect, but it sure as hell beats the alternatives, and I would still prefer they did things in a democratic way where adults get round tables and talk and work things out. So the problem is that there aren't rights and wrongs. There are lots of grey areas in all these things. You know that I don't, on balance, like the 100, but it would be disingenuous to pretend there aren't some positives. I can understand that there were some good intentions behind it once a long time ago. So again and again, I'm going to say the same thing, that I think there needs to be an independent regulator. I think the game has failed to regulate itself. I think that the crisis around diversity, inclusion, and let's be honest, racism, has shown that, because the game's failed to react well enough. The PCA has failed to react well enough. The ECB too. There has to be change, and I don't think the game is strong enough to force the change required through. It doesn't have the sort of legal power to do it. It needs government help. It looks like football's going that way. I think cricket needs to as well. Maybe there needs to be the equivalent of a governing body for major sports events with some sort of government oversight. I don't think the way we're doing things at the moment is working. Cricket's absolute chaos, isn't it? And it's not really working on any level. I mean, I know that they've brought more money into the game than ever before, but equally the amount of debt is vast. Lots of counties are struggling to carry on. The England team's performances have been a bit up and down. That's putting it mildly, isn't it? There have been some great successes, the great success being the 2019 World Cup, but almost immediately they've given up on the format, which seems extraordinary. And you wouldn't be particularly optimistic about, right now, I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, about the major goals in the England future being achieved. I'm not massively optimistic about the T20 World Cup, the World Cup. And to be honest, when I saw the new FTP, it filled me with dread. I just don't think the world needs England playing 5 Test series in India. I think that's bad for Test cricket. I actually don't think 5 Test series in Australia are particularly good for Test cricket. Some people disagree. There's a lot of tradition around that, but the last Ashes series in Australia was wretched for the game, I thought.
The last 3 Ashes series in Australia have been wretched.
Well, to some extent, I thought the one where they were beaten 5-0 with Mitchell Johnson and all was incredible drama, because that was a special Australia side and the ending of an era for an England side. And while it was pretty macabre viewing, it was also gripping. The last time, it was just sad.
Excellent.
I mean,
but
even
17-18, I would say that was a worse series for the viewer than 21-22.
I would agree, only in that at least England had the decency to, to be killed off in 3 days a couple of times this time round. Whereas there are a lot of very inevitable 4.5-day defeats, weren't there? In 17, there was the MCG test, the MCG draw that was
even worse.
That could have gone about 10 days.
The only game that England didn't lose was actually the worst game of the 5. And the other 4 were essentially England not being able to bowl Australia out because they had...
Well, that is. I mean, I know we really are splitting hairs here, but that actually I thought was what was better about last winter. That at least the games were moved on fairly quickly.
I agree.
That was partly because the
That's
pitch was
why it
alive,
was better.
partly because England couldn't bat. But
It was more car crash.
It feels like this feels like a fairly moot point in the wider context.
Yeah.
But,
sorry to sort of be dominated at this stage. But the point I was going to make was that all these decisions have been made with short-term financial interests at heart. And the long-term interests of the game are not going to be served by another one-sided series in India and Australia. And to be honest, I thought the decision not to be playing a series against West Indies was immoral. It's a strong word, but I think it's immoral. English cricket owes West Indies cricket in lots of ways, but most recently, was it 2020, when West Indies gave up their own home season, basically, spent a lot of time in lockdown Britain and bailed England out. and it's been
Their
forgotten.
women's team flew over effectively having played no cricket, having hardly seen each other, having been stranded on different islands, stranded on their different home islands, literally cobbled together, came and spent 3 weeks in Derby in the middle of September, freezing cold, to fulfil a fixture list, and obviously not for the same financial reasons, but that whole package of that summer. Obviously, they weren't the only tourists, but yeah, it really did save the day.
They really did, and I remember
in the same way but this was funny because it was the same with Pakistan, and that was obviously.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, the shambles of last winter was, a very similar story, but at least that has been rectified with what is, fingers crossed, due to happen this winter.
It hasn't happened yet, so let's.
No, exactly.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. The two sides that came to England's rescue have then been treated shoddily.
The only thing I'll say is who loses out. Are you suggesting that instead of going to India for 5 tests in January 2024, they should go to India for 3 tests and the West Indies for 2 tests? Is that what you're saying? Because England aren't touring Sri Lanka either till 2026 or something. They haven't toured Bangladesh since 2018. No, when did they tour Bangladesh last? Why I understand what the West Indies did for England, but England did go back to West Indies this year and they extended their tour. So there was some form of payback, and why I completely understand.
Sorry, just to stop you there. They didn't actually extend their tour. They played an extra test within the same time frame that they were there anyway.
But that's still more.
They played an extra test, and I think they might have played an extra T20 or 2 actually.
So they extended the tour, right?
Well, it was the same length of tour, but yeah.
But it still gets.
So as I've said, I think that 5 tests.
But hang on. But that's another island that they visit. Okay, by adding another test, that means there's more tourism money, right?
Yes.
But we're splitting hairs slightly. The point I'm trying to make is that I understand the headline behind England not going to the West Indies, but England aren't going to Sri Lanka, and they're not going to Bangladesh till 2027, which if. That would be a gap of they're going for an ODI series, aren't they, at the start of next year? But what about those countries? They deserve a bit of love, don't they?
Yes, they do. And English cricket has a responsibility. English cricket in particular has a responsibility. And I noted yesterday a conversation on Sky where they were suggesting the administrators need to be taking a look at things. It's not just the administrators; it's the broadcasters. The administrators and the broadcasters. They're shacked up together at an incredibly close relationship. It's too bloody close. It's too close. You're not getting journalism anymore. You're getting propaganda.
But it is linked, and this is why the link with the players' pay, the amount of money that the ECB takes from the broadcasters, and the amount of money that the broadcasters give and therefore demand back. This
is why there must not be a continuity candidate. The boat needs rocking.
Well, that's maybe true, but that broadcast deal's set in stone now. It's not changing.
Well, you say that. Everything can be changed. Jesus. Britain left Europe. Things can be changed.
Have you ever heard any indication in this country that there is another broadcaster that is in any way interested in taking cricket from Sky?
Well, that old joke about someone who stops the car and asks for directions, and the fella that says, well, you don't want to start from here. Well, it's a bit like that. You don't start the relationship from scratch. You have to woo broadcasters for years.
By the way, that anecdote about stopping the car and asking for directions reminds me of a time me and Neil Manthorpe we tried to run back from the Kensington Oval to our apartment at, where's that place? Holders Hill. And it was supposed to be 9 kilometres, and all you have to do is run out the ground to the sea, turn right, and run along the beach for 8 kilometres, and then I found somebody in Neil Manthorpe who's got an even worse sense of direction than I have. We ended up running through the back streets of Bridgetown for 12 kilometres. We eventually found ran past this woman and just asked her for directions, and she just said, "Take a bus." We were like, "Oh, thanks a lot," and off we went. When we got to wherever we were, we looked at our Fitbits and we'd run the best part of 15 kilometres. Fast forward to the next day, basically I was sitting at the cricket ground producing and had the worst cramp for the entire day. Anyway,
you just squeezed in an anecdote about you running 15 Ks there. Talking of which, I think that should take us on to Nick.
Yeah, I think so.
Who ran about 15 metres before developing a cramp on Saturday.
Can I just say something, Nick? Like, for the listeners and followers of this show...
You knew this was coming.
Mate, we've been hearing you moaning about your dodgy hamstring for the last 2 months. And then, shock horror, it was a problem when you put on a Mascot. No, I had no idea. Why have you not mentioned it on the show?
I was torn between trying to keep it a secret and then sort of, drop the piece afterwards, and it'd be quite confusing to especially those who've been there, and sort of noticed me disappear for an hour. I was talking
hour and a half, I reckon.
It was more than that. And it took me about an hour and a half to reappear once I'd finished quite. I delayed the second semi-final. It's meant to take 2 minutes. I took 4 minutes and 49 seconds. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Like physical exertion, I've never done anything worse than that. In fact, I was at Lord's yesterday and we're getting some post-day quotes, and one of the players walked past me and mentioned that I'd done the Mascot race, and I turned to him and he'd been fielding 40 degrees all day. I turned to him and I've got no sympathy for what you lot did out there after what I did in the weekend, because it might only have been 30 degrees outside at Edgbaston, but I can tell you, once you've got your 7 layers of fur on and some ridiculous helmet that literally is just the most painful, uncomfortable thing you could possibly wear. I reckon it was 60 degrees inside me, and I had so many fears. I'm petrified.
And they all came true.
No, one didn't. The big fear, as you touch on,
your trousers fell down.
No, I was being stretched off with a hamstring recurrence in front of 20,000 people while dressed as a cat.
We should explain, shouldn't we? Because some people won't know what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah,
I won't have done for about a quarter of an hour, actually. But Nick was dressed as the Panther.
I was Pinky the Panther in the
Middlesex
20th,
mascot.
The Middlesex mascot in the T20
and if you haven't seen it,
in the Mascot race,
have a look online, because it's like one of those pictures where you see a big cat with a trophy hunter standing over them. That's what he looked like.
It's better than the picture though, because I thought, if I'm going to do this, and this was me thinking, I guess content production wise, much as anything, if you're going to do this, you've got to write a piece about doing it, you've got to make sure you've got someone photographing you, and you've got to make sure you've got some kind of video.
You really set yourself up to fail, didn't you? I mean,
genuinely, and I wrote this in the piece, I do genuinely mean this. I was, and I still am, surprised at how bad I was, and I'm surprised at how eventful I was. I allowed the Blast content guys to attach a GoPro to my chest, and I think even they were surprised at the level of content I managed to come back with, including a moment where I got out of one of the obstacles and had to ask which way I was meant to go. I was about to set off back where I'd come from, towards the ball pit, where I'd spent about 2 minutes.
Can I ask you a quick question before you continue? Because I watched the GoPro. I love the bit where you studiously putting your gloves back on as well. I was like, why on earth are you doing that? But can I just ask you one quick question? At what point did you realise you were in real trouble?
So here's a bit of context that you obviously don't get from watching the race on TV or even at the ground. Is that you don't put on your costume and then the starting pistol goes. You are in that thing for 45 minutes, from being in the hold in the indoor school to being taken over to the groundsman's hut, where you sort of stay until effectively until Lancashire beating Yorkshire, and then until the inflatables have been inflated. So it really is and it's always sweltering on finals day, even when it was in September. So you've been in that thing for 45 minutes, and by the start, and this is not, this is probably the worst answer I can give. I knew I was in trouble before the race began, but I knew I was in particular trouble because there's about a 20-metre dash to the dash is a loose term. 20-metre dash to the ball pit, which is the first obstacle, and I approached the ball pit, and I knew I was in real strife then, because I always thought it was quite low, and I planned to jog into it and literally to step into the ball pit, but I was so sweaty even before we'd started, just from being in it for so long, that I got there and I realised it was bigger than I thought, and I couldn't just step into it. But what then transpired was that I was so sweaty, and you call them gloves, I call them paws, because I'm in character. My paws were so sweaty that I had lost the ability to take friction, and I could not. I think I described it in the piece as like sort of like the death of Mufasa. I just slid down anything I touched. I could not grip onto this bloody inflatable, which then meant that I just couldn't get in. And I wanted to be last into the ball pit, because I thought if I'm last into it, because it's carnage, like it is absolute carnage. It's honestly like Beecher's Brook at the National. All the horses going over it at once, and there are bits of fence falling over, and the odd horse goes down. Like, you are all front flipping into this thing. And my thought was, if I'm into it, if I go in last, I thought I'd do it like, long distance running style, sort of with a kick. Start with a kick and then come back and hit people later, and not literally, but like, try and overtake later. I thought I'd be last into the pen, get out in one piece, and go from there. And I thought I was last into it. But then I got absolutely walloped by a member of Essex's comms team, who was in Eddie the Eagle, which is their mascot. So I got absolutely thumped in the head by that. I genuinely concussed from that point onwards, so I couldn't get into it, but then I also couldn't get out. So I was stuck in this pen, and all I could hear, I don't know how professional athletes do it, because all I could hear was the laughter of the crowd. Literally the only thing my brain would allow me to get was this laughter. And I know there are 20 of us, or 24 of us, but I also know that they were laughing at me, and that like my head had fallen off. I then tried to carry my head out of the pit, but my paws were so sweaty that I dropped the head. So I'm running around, and this was my big realistic fear, beyond the hamstring, was that I would be unmasked, and not because it would ruin the piece, just because there were 20,000 people there, and I hate the idea of that happening. But I'm running around with my head in my hands. I could just hear people laughing. I got it back on. I was so gone in the Swede that these inflatable stumps that effectively, it's just a path. They inflate a path, you run over the top of it. I was so gone, and I couldn't see out of this helmet either. I crawled through it for some reason. I don't know why, but I vividly remember, even as I was crawling, thinking, why are you crawling, man? Like, you could just walk this or run this bit. And then I got stuck in the net. And then I refused to go round. You're meant to go once round this giant ball, but the race had been finished for about a minute and a half, so I was just very keen to get the finish. And frankly, I was dizzy enough as it was, so I didn't need to go round again. And then the giraffe, I think, had collapsed or was just knackered or was lying on the floor. And I nearly did the Derek Redmond, and I thought we could finish together and it'd be a real sweet moment. But then a part of my brain, the competitive part of my brain, which is the main part, I hate losing. But then I thought, if I leave him, I will beat him. So I left him. And then I got stuck at this thing because, once again, I just could not haul myself over with my sweat. And while I was struggling to haul myself over, the giraffe, who, as I say, only a few seconds earlier I thought was down for the count, ran past me and leapt over the thing that I couldn't climb past. So I finished last, and then immediately my focus just turned to knowing that you were going to have to return to this press box that has a great view of that race, and that I knew was watching, because I'd given it the big un when I was down, like before the race, waving at them. I did the Usain Bolt thing, proper punch in the air. A few real, like, I sort of, when goalkeepers like whack their gloves together, it's not quite a clap, it's just like a thud of gloves. I was doing that, like trying to pretend to psych myself up for the camera that was attached to me. The whole thing was extreme. I never wanted to do it, is what I should say. I just wanted to have done it, if that makes sense.
Let me ask you about James Vince. Should James Vince be playing for England, and is it possible he ends up captain of England?
I think the latter is quite far-fetched, but I certainly think... I think what's a shame with James Vince, actually, is that there've been a lot of times in his England career when you would write... When there was probably a justifiable moment to write him off as an international cricketer and to say that he's had enough chances and he's not done it. What feels like a shame is that actually he got his ton in that Pakistan series last year, in the emergency ODI series, against a very good Pakistan side, in that England side that were brilliant. And Vince suddenly became a senior player in that team because he'd played probably more for England than most in that side, apart from Ben Stokes and a couple of others off the top of my head. And he got his 100, he looked the part, and we've not really seen him since then, which feels like which does feel like a shame, because that was an ODI cricket. And actually, I do wonder with Stokes' ODI retirement, whether actually it's going to be that hard to replace Ben Stokes with someone who can do all the things that Ben Stokes does. I think where Ben Stokes is most valuable in the 50-over team is with his batting. He averages 40 in the top four. Won England the World Cup with off his bat. He's always been a fairly expensive seamer who has been he's not often bowled his 10 overs.
No, he bowled 3 overs I think in the World Cup final, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So actually, and with what England now have with Liam Livingstone, if he's a long-term part of their plans, and Sam Curran, if he's a long-term part of their plans, is 2 guys who can do the bowling bit if they're worried about losing a few overs. And I do then wonder whether James Vince, Ben Duckett is probably up there as well, and a couple of others, Sam Hain.
I think Brooke is probably favourite, but
Harry
yeah.
Brooke, Will. I mean, actually, that Quick Lions series against South Africa was great, wasn't it? Because Will Smead, I think will play for England at some point soon, whatever format that is, whenever that is. Tom Banton's still really young as well.
Never
it's sort of
scored
easy
for
to
List
forget
A run.
The last thing I'd say on Vince is that, it's really on that Pakistan point, and that to me felt like the least natural time for him to be cut adrift. It wouldn't surprise me if he plays Test cricket again, in the short, medium term future. It wouldn't, and it would disappoint. It would really be a shame if he didn't play international cricket again, because he has so clearly got the game, and I think that's the second time he's scored the most runs in a blast season. But he got his. It just looks $1 million, doesn't it? And he, I think he knows. My hope is that what happened in the Pakistan time is that he realised he then comes away with the confidence that he so clearly has in the domestic game when he's played some knocks that just looks so much a class apart. And by the way, he does bowl a few seamers as well. I was at the Ageos when he took a winning when he bounced out Andrew Balburney. So
he
can
if you
do
remember
it if
when
required.
he was dropped, Ed Myth said that he didn't have a history, ballpark anyway, this is what he said, doesn't have a history, doesn't have a track record of scoring runs consistently. And then he selected Jason Roy to open for England, selected Joe Denley, who he said was a special all-rounder, and put Ollie Pope at 4 when he had never batted there before. So,
and Josh Butler as specialist 7.
A specialist number 7, of which there is no such job. It's like being a unicorn. They're specialist number 7s. They don't exist. Name me one. Anyway, we're going back. So I don't think anyone doubts that James Vince is good enough. He's played 13 tests. He averages 25 or something. That's not great, but he's got, in football sense, you would say he's got time on the ball. He's got fantastic time on the ball. He is good enough.
Well, Mark Nicholas, and I know that there is the obvious Hampshire link on and off air, just says James Vince is the best cricketer in county cricket as far as he's concerned.
Well, that's strong.
Well, it's
It's
interesting.
strong.
But it's interesting.
But it is. But it's strong. He says it off air.
I know he does.
Without turning this back to
without
turning this back to the Bazball stuff. I mean, he does strike me as one of several players who have had a go before, and I think I've talked about Dom Sibley in this context on this pod actually, that being someone who, given the backing to play his shots, and granted Trevor Bayliss, Vince had to go under Bayliss as well, so it's not to say he's never played in an uninhibited environment, but you do wonder whether Vince is the kind of player who, given the chance to just go out there and bat freely in Test cricket against the Red Bull, would would really thrive in that. And for what it's worth, on Martin Nicholas' comments, I speak to several county cricketers, and they have said the same thing. The best player I see is James Vince. It's not a rarely held view. Even if he's not, that's the thing with James Vince, isn't it? Even when he's not scored the big runs, that was the criticism. Pretty 30s and stuff like that. But they do still give you an indication, I think.
That run out in Brisbane still hurts, eh?
Yeah, genuinely, if you look at that series, we were talking about the 17-18 series earlier. If you look at that series, if Vince makes 20 more runs at Brisbane, doesn't get run out, it really is sliding doors moments, because Dow Milan gets a ton at Perth, scores about, ends up having a far better series than Vince, but actually if Vince gets a ton...
And Vince got an unplayable ball in Perth.
Yeah, on 50 odd, having got, if I remember correctly, a pretty glorious 50. But if he gets a ton at the Gabba, his series might look different, but more than anything, he's got an Ashes 100 in Australia. And on that basis alone, he probably goes to Australia last winter.
And he made it look easy. And those guys are bowling quick.
But it really is. It is the sport in general. It's sliding doors moments, and you can look at that. The Jaffa from the start ball is Jaffa, and he's missing it 10 times out of 10. But there is an argument to say that he's hit the Nathan Lyon run out is. He's done well to hit the stumps, but you give him the opportunity, don't you? So there'll always be that bit against Vince that he's had the opportunity and not nailed it. But as I say, last time he did play for England, ODI cricket at least, he did start to nail it, and maybe that is.
So the other point we were saying, John, is that you're looking at people who could come into the England ODI side now potentially as a replacement for Ben Stokes, and Smead isn't perhaps absolutely first in the queue. But he's clearly a particularly talented guy. I think he's only 20.
He's one of the most talented. He's one of the most impressive young cricketers I've ever spoken to. It was gobsmacked. I think I first spoke to him when he was 18. I just could not believe the maturity and but also just the talent. Watching him in the 100 last year was, and for all that playing the 100 through. Sort of the latter stage of the pandemic and lockdown restrictions, for all the slight difficulties it caused, it did mean replacement opportunities for guys like Smead, and actually he absolutely, I thought he was one of the stories of the entire competition, and then what he's done, for Somerset since the Blast, and in that line on his Lions debut. It's a shame that one wasn't a List A game, really, wasn't it? He belted 90 in no time,
but the one that was a List A
PSL,
game,
and he got naught.
He got naught, so he's never scored a List A run.
But weirdly, has 4. I think he's got 4 T20 90s without a touch.
Yeah, but you don't pick.
I know different games, of course. But
you don't pick Mo Farah for the 100-metre team. I mean, they are very different. The whole of county cricket was changed in. I don't remember. I want to say 14, maybe 13, because the ECB said it was terribly important that county cricket replicated international cricket. What happened to that? I mean, there must be differences between. There are whole sections of play in 50-over cricket which are wildly different from T20 cricket. I know that there are some skills which replicate. Of course there are. Of course the aggression and a scope of what a batter can do has been increased by T20, but there are whole sections of play which are unique to 50-over cricket. And we are going to have to pick people for the England side now who may never have played 50-over cricket. And actually, Matthew Potts was picked yesterday. He had played one List A game before yesterday in 38 months.
Yeah, I agree.
Nonsense.
I think that's why when you see...
There's no way that you were giving England the best chance when this is happening. They've given up on a format.
I've said here, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I have not disagreed with that philosophy before on the basis that England play their 50-over cricket effectively as extended T20s, and you see the other side of it in the Netherlands where they come 2 runs off 500 and all that kind of thing, and ultimately.
But it's against the Netherlands.
I'm sorry. Well, no. I'm
It's not the same as
there is a caveat. Well, there is a caveat. Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly flip-flopping here,
first team either.
That there is something. There are obvious, as you are right. There are periods in 50-over cricket that you just don't have to navigate in 20-over cricket, and even if the ball is doing a bit, you are still given the license to just go out there, and we've only got 20 overs to bat. We've got 10 wickets to lose. It doesn't really matter. If someone comes off, then we'll win the game. That kind of thing. And I completely see it. That is, where England are very lucky right now is that their guy in that position is Joe Root, and Joe Root can navigate that passage of play. But you are right that there will come a time where, if this is the way the 50 over 50, if this is the way the calendar looks domestically, there will come a time when they're going to be asking someone or a few guys to come in, and Jason Roy, when he's out of nick, is extremely frenetic, but does still have the foundations of both a red ball game and a 50 over game to navigate those periods and then to cash in when it's flat. And so likewise with Johnny Bairstow as a Test cricketer. And I remember speaking to Carlos Brathwaite actually before the season started, and I took him back to the 2016 World T20 final and said, do you think that innings negatively impacted your batting over the last 6 years? And he never really thought about it, but he said 100%, because he never played. He averaged upwards of 40, I think, in Test cricket with the bat before the World T20 final, but hardly ever played a red ball game, or if ever played a red ball game after the World T20 final in 2016. He said that actually, because he became this sought after T20 player, but the upshot of that was that he said that he completely lost the foundations of his game, and he said that actually it's only in the last couple of years where he felt like he started to get his batting back, because he took time out of the game and just hit balls, hit red balls, hit white balls, just went and netted and hit balls because he'd lost the foundations through playing the longer formats. And I think a lot of the guys have said, I think Will Speed said that fairly recently, as much as he's done all his cricket and had all his success in T20 cricket so far, he's very conscious that if he focuses solely on that, he still wants to play red ball cricket, because it gives you a base, and it does give you something to go back to when it is nipping around a bit and it is a bit tough, and and it does require you to bed in for a bit. So 100%, like if England on a flat one in the right conditions, being brought up in T20 cricket will always have its benefits in 50 over cricket, especially with where there's that philosophy that England have and the confidence they have to go from ball one. But as we've seen, I think these last few weeks on decks that haven't been quite so flat, and I guess as we saw in that World Cup final 2019 on a tougher pitch to bat on, you do require a different set of skills that you don't necessarily get if you had just been.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an unsophisticated approach to say, we've got our T20 skills, we'll apply them. It's a different sport, well, a different format, and as I say, it's disrespectful to the format, and if you don't give yourself every opportunity to learn in a format where role definition is so important. And so many different phases of the game. For example, Australia have this phase of the game, don't they, where Stark comes back on. Is it about the 32nd over ballpark? And he does it almost every game, and he makes the ball reverse. Well, there's nothing that happens like that in T20 cricket. It's completely unique.
We haven't discussed some of the things that we were hoping to, but we will do that next week, if that's okay, because of course. We are midway point of another round of county championship games, so we're going to be looking back at that, and also looking ahead to the 100, I suppose. Got to work out how to go about doing that, or if we even bother. Let's be honest, I'm not sure we will. Nick, George, thanks for your time. Following on County Cricketer, we'll be back next week.